Hi, everyone. I'm Rich Tani, president of DHF Consulting. Tom Zano and I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome our friends and clients to this virtual discussion. ZHF Consulting is a bipartisan government affairs firm located in Columbus, Ohio, and is wholly owned by Zano Hall and Barron LLC, which is a law firm that focuses on tax and government affairs matters. You can learn more about ZHF Consulting by visiting our website at zhfconsulting.com. So today we brought together a bipartisan panel of seasoned professionals in the energy space and Ohio politics to discuss a very timely and important issue, as well as controversial. The title of our panel discussion today is Reactor Reactions: How Will Ohio Address the Fallout of House Bill 6? Our esteemed panel will discuss how Ohio can move forward amid the House Bill 6 energy bailout and all the issues surrounding the bribery scheme allegations and investigations, and they will discuss all the latest developments, whether to repeal it, replace it, discuss all the good, the bad, and what's next as we move forward. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce our panelists. First, we have Representative Bill Seitz, a Republican from Cincinnati in the 30th House District. He is a longtime legislator, served both in the House and Senate. He's currently back in the House, serving in his second term, and serves in leadership as a majority floor leader in the House Republican caucus. He serves on the Public Utilities Committee and several others. And while in the Senate, he served as chairman of the Public Utilities Committee. He is also an attorney. We also have Gene Krebs, who is a former Republican House member. He's also a former county commissioner, former local school board member, and now he's most proud of the title as an accomplished author of Bridges Across Every Divide. Sorry about that, Gene. He has most recently resigned as chair of the Ohio Consumers Council Governing Board. He has been very busy. He has been a research executive, and he also appears as a regular on many of the TV shows as a Republican voice on many political and policy issues. Gene is also a seventh-generation farmer, 400 acres on his family farm. So we also have Stephanie Cromer. Stephanie is with the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. She serves as the Director of Energy and Environmental Policy. She previously worked in the Ohio House of Representatives and served as the clerk for the Finance Subcommittee on Agriculture, Development, and Natural Resources. Last but not least, we have Dan Dodd. Dan is the Vice President of Government Affairs at ZHF Consulting. He also serves as the President of the Ohio Association of Independent Schools. Dan is also a former Democratic member of the Ohio House of Representatives. And Dan is also an attorney. And then serving as our moderator for today's event is Joe Price. Joe Price is with the Timken Steel Corporation. Joe is the Senior Manager of Government Affairs and Energy Commodity. Joe is responsible for managing and purchasing electricity and natural gas for one of Ohio's largest manufacturers and energy consumers. So with that, I'd like to thank our panelists today. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Joe, and he can get us started with the discussion. So thanks, Joe. Can't hear you, Joe.
Thank you for that. Thanks, Rich. Appreciate the welcoming remarks and the introductions. We've got a very distinguished panel, as everyone knows. So we'll get right into the questions and try to make sure we have a nice balanced discussion. And the first question, I'll go to Dan Dodd. It's kind of a political question. We've got the first presidential debate occurring this evening. The November election is just a little more than a month away. I guess, where does the General Assembly go from here as it relates to House Bill 6? Is the legislation itself tainted? What are the political forces at work at the moment?
Well, I think as far as the legislation goes, there's certainly a cloud over it, at the very least. I also don't think that the state of Ohio has a long history of essentially rewarding this kind of behavior by continuing to allow legislation to remain law that was part of an ill-gotten scheme where a company or companies and individuals spent tens of millions of dollars to influence the process in a malicious way. And I think as you look to not only the November elections, but the lame duck session, I think members of the House and the Senate are in some ways going to see if there's an accountability issue that is connected to the November elections. Did people lose because they voted for it, or did they win and maybe they voted against it, and they're going to use that as part of their campaigns? But I think as far as what the General Assembly is going to do, a lot of it's going to be determined by the attitude of House and Senate leadership in lame duck session. And there's a lot of things that get passed in a lame duck session in a very short period of time. I think that the committee process that the House has laid out is going to have a lot of pressure on it to make sure that they can get through that and determine if they're going to repeal and replace it or just repeal it altogether. But there isn't a lot of time left in the session, so if it gets held over till next session, I think it's going to essentially put more pressure on folks to make the case for either repeal and replace or replace it altogether.
Who else would like a word on that? Anyone?
Well, Joe, I happen to think it's a very good law. I happen to think that whatever taint is associated with it only affects a small part of it. And I think we now know that nothing is going to happen before the election because Speaker Cupp made the wise decision of holding multiple hearings so that members can understand what all is in the bill besides the nuclear subsidy. And over those hearings, we've already learned a number of things. We've learned that other than the environmentalists, no one wants to repeal the bill and bring back the failed Strickland-era renewable portfolio mandates and the energy efficiency mandates. Just last week, both the Ohio Consumers Council and the Ohio Manufacturers Association, who had previously supported those mandates, testified that they did not want them to return. And of course, they would return if all we did was repeal the bill in its entirety. We know that the bill facilitated the development of 4 utility-scale solar facilities, which when built will provide more solar than 12 years of the failed Strickland-era mandates produced. We know that there were provisions in the bill that I personally negotiated that facilitated the wider deployment of industrial wind at large manufacturing sites such as Whirlpool and Ball Corporation. We know that the bill reduced the electricity cost for all of our county fairs by about 50%. We know that the rural electric cooperatives do not want to repeal the bill. We know that the bill actually caps the amount of the subsidy that can be extended for the Ohio Valley Electric cooperative payments at levels lower than what the PUCO already approved. So I've just ticked off about 5 or 6 things that are part of House Bill 6, good things, that would all go away if it was repealed. So I think we may do something in lame duck, but I do not think it will be an outright repeal. And I personally am going to advocate against a repeal and replace, because if we do that, the replacement itself would be subject to a new possible referendum, and we do not need a repeat of that goat rodeo, when there are much better ways to improve the accountability that is required for the nuclear subsidies to be paid and to continue. And we can talk about those ideas later.
Thanks, Bill. Okay, well, moving along, we heard a little bit from Representative Seitz there about what he thought were some of the good policy provisions. Let's focus on that first. Stephanie, with the chamber, can you walk us through, are there any good policy that, from your viewpoint, in House Bill 6?
Sure. During the House Bill 6 debate, the Ohio Chamber remained an interested party throughout the multiple iterations of the bill. Prior to passage of House Bill 6, the Chamber had consistently asked previous General Assemblies to act to reform some of these expensive energy efficiency mandates. And unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, including a previous gubernatorial veto, only incremental changes designed to mitigate the cost impacts had ever been enacted. So although we had never advocated for an outright repeal of the energy efficiency mandates, House Bill 6 did address those concerns that our members had with the escalating costs of energy efficiency mandates.
Great. Great. Anyone else want to chime in on any of the positives, policies? I know Representative Seitz mentioned several of them. If not, we can go right into what, if anybody has any, what do we think the bad policy provisions that were enacted as part of House Bill 6? Gene, do you want to chime in there?
Well, what I'll speak to on that is that about a year ago, on the Columbus on the Record Talking Head show, we were talking about House Bill 6, and I pointed out that unfortunately, every member who voted for House Bill 6 now has a glass ceiling above their head, that they're going to find it difficult to break through just because, and this was a year ago, because of how things were going. I also stated that even if there was a referendum, it would not get them off the hook. And what I was referring to there was the fact that it was widely known that the Justice Department and the FBI weren't coming around on this. And so what I think is best politically and the best way to handle all the good and the bad parts of House Bill 6 is to repeal. And then the parts that can get to majority votes, both in committee and on the floor, go ahead and then vote those through. And then the people know they have a much more honest proposal in front of them. But at the end of the day, what we all have to face up to, and that we have to address the subsidy issue of this. And I think it's important to remember that, and Rich, ironically, I was in the room when your old boss, John Kerry, came to the House Republican caucus and said that he needed help with the Ormet aluminum smelter down on the Ohio River. And that what the agreement was just to do a subsidy for that smelter based upon that one county. We had letters from all the county commissioners, city, school boards, townships, everybody, Rotary clubs, they all weighed in and supported this. And we reluctantly went ahead and approved it, because your then boss was very persuasive. The difficulty is that with time, that subsidy has kept on growing. And if you've ever read the book Nudge by Fowler and Springsteen, what you come across there is that there's a tendency for all of us humans to throw good money after bad. We do not know for sure, for example, how much money, the company A really needed for their subsidy. But now we don't know if this will ever be enough. And so because of once you gauge in the subsidies, and this also applies to the mandates for renewables. Those were set up to be relatively short term and to help the industries get off to a start. I'd say that by and large, they've accomplished their purpose, and we need to do a serious examination of phasing them out. So when you look at this, what you need to keep peeling the onion back on is having a discussion, first and foremost, about the subsidy, but also what we really need is a comprehensive, integrated energy policy for the state of Ohio. And that's something we do not have yet.
Thanks. Would anyone like to chime in there?
Well, I'll talk about subsidies. The subsidy extended to the 2 nuclear power plants is maxed out at $9 per megawatt hour. Works out to be 85 cents a month for residential ratepayers, which is not very much money. And overall, the bill confers a $2.3 billion rate cut for all ratepayers in Ohio, residential, commercial, and industrial. It's fine to say, let's get rid of that nuclear subsidy. But unfortunately, the federal government is already subsidizing wind at $21 per megawatt hour. And I do not hear the environmentalists clamoring for the elimination of their subsidy. So until everyone is willing to get out of the subsidy game and create a level playing field, we are faced with the unfortunate fact that some subsidy may be necessary. To me, the $1 million question is the $9 per megawatt hour really needed? And therefore, I work with the Industrial Energy Users Group, the Ohio Energy Group. Why do I work with them? They're the two largest buyers of electricity in the state of Ohio. They therefore have the greatest incentive to know the most there is to know about how to buy electricity in the most efficient way. And both of those groups have suggested to me that you don't need to repeal this bill. You don't need to replace this bill. You do need to strengthen the audit standards that were part of the bill. And one very attractive idea that I've been reading about and looking into is a provision that would say, listen, Energy Harbor, we're not giving you one dime of rate of return. We're not giving you one dime of profit. We're going to bar you from any excessive executive compensation. You will only get, to the extent you can prove it through prudent cost accounting methods, you will only get the amount of money that you need, up to $9 per megawatt hour, and that's it. We will give you depreciation because that creates a cash flow for your two nuclear power plants. But other than that, no profit, no rate of return. And I think if they can prove that they need the subsidy up to the $9, I think that's fine, because after all, these two nuclear power plants produce 90% of Ohio's carbon-free electricity. They have years left to go on their useful life under their federal licenses. Why would we retire the asset before the end of its useful life? And they provide a lot in the way of jobs and tax base for the folks in the immediately affected areas of Ottawa County and Lake County and surrounding environs. So there is a good reason to keep some nuclear in the mix, not least of which is, if the Democrats get their way, if you read Kamala Harris, if you read Gavin Newsom, if you read AOC, depending on the day, if you read Joe Biden, they want to ban fracking and stop pipelines. And if that happens, the current price advantage enjoyed by natural gas in the production of electricity will disappear overnight. And we will wish we had some nuclear plants around as a hedge against spiking gas prices, which over the years we've seen in the past. We saw gas go up when Gene Krebs was in the legislature, I believe, from the current price of about $3 per MCF up to $11, $12, $13, $14 per MCF. So gas is a volatile commodity. And if the Democrats get their way at the national level, the price of natural gas will go up. We're going to wish we had nuclear around. So I think there is a case to be made, but we were lax in the bill in not requiring sufficiently rigid standards for Energy Harbor, the former subsidiary of First Energy, to prove that it's really necessary.
Joe, I think I want to jump in there a second. One, to say that Vice President Biden does not want to ban fracking. And so I think that needs to be made clear. But the other thing that I would point out is that I think recent events have indicated to us, at least the public in general, or maybe many of us, that perhaps the representations made by a taxpayer or a company as far as what their actual expenses are and what their needed expenses are and what their permittable deductible expenses are should not always be taken at face value. Now, I understand that the representative has said that there will be an audit to ensure that Energy Harbor is only getting the money that they say is necessary. My concern would be that, one, whether or not there's anybody or any agency within state government that is truly qualified and capable, even PUCO, which I understand has a lot of good folks working there, to go through an audit of someone like Energy Harbor to determine whether or not all of that money was necessary and appropriate, and in fact, they are entitled to all of it. I think the way that these things get tied up, whether it's through an audit process or through a legal process, if it would get that far, means that it's going to be one slog after another to determine what Energy Harbor is entitled to. Additionally, I think the fact remains that First Energy spent over $60 million on this, and we are entrusting any accountability for that to the federal government. Now, I understand that there are state investigations going on, but I think the General Assembly has a responsibility to demonstrate to others who may be inclined to engage in these types of schemes, to let them know and put them on notice that they're not going to be rewarded by continuing a policy that was achieved through some illegal means. And so that's why I think that there ought to be a repeal. I don't disagree that there are many good aspects of House Bill 6, but I think the message needs to be sent that the state of Ohio is not going to sign off on people engaging in these types of activities and then saying, well, the ends justified the means. I think it's a bad precedent to set, and if the policy is that great and the individual aspects of the bill are that great, then somebody can bring forward legislation either in lame duck or next year to reinstate those, and then we can have a new discussion about it.
So let me go ahead and do something dangerous, which is disagree with two people at the same time. One, Dan, I do believe that PUCO, which I have many criticisms of, but I do think the PUCO could probably do an audit. If not directly with their employees, they can easily have it shopped out. Second thing is, I do remind everybody of what Mark Twain said, which is history seldom repeats, but it does often rhyme. By the time that Kasich finally pulled the plug on Ormet was being subsidized by the southern third of the state. And I think that's the real danger with all of these subsidies, especially massive, larger ones, is that the entity being subsidized has a very hard time getting off of that. And we need to be very, very cautious about in doing so. Any subsidies need to be limited, audited, and for a very specific time period to get us through a very particular situation. And without those in place, I just think that we're asking for trouble again in the state.
Okay, excellent exchange back and forth. Moving along, one of the things that I heard a couple of people mention is, and then there's been calls for it, publicly, et cetera, by different interests. But hey, just repeal it. Let's start over. Let's get a comprehensive energy bill that we all can get behind. I guess what are the policy considerations and challenges for that we should be aware of when trying to tackle something that everyone could get behind, I guess, is the question. Let's go to Representative Seitz to start that one.
Well, I think, in a way, when you say let's get a comprehensive energy policy that everybody can get behind, you're asking for unicorns, leprechauns, and pots of gold at the end of the rainbow. I've been at this for at least 12 years now, having chaired both the Senate and the House Public Utilities Committee. I've worked on these issues for 12 years. I have yet to find a comprehensive energy policy that everybody can get behind. Because why? Because everybody's got their own axe to grind. The gas people want to run coal and nuclear out so that they can be the only game in town. The environmentalists want to promote wind and solar. They're in an unholy alliance with the gas people because wind doesn't work when the wind doesn't blow. Solar doesn't work when the sun doesn't shine. So they need backup capacity, which can ideally be provided best by gas. You've got the coal interests saying, well, what are we, chopped liver? We've provided baseload capacity for a long, long time. You've got the nuclear people saying we should be part of the mix. We've got years left to go on our operating license. We're producing carbon-free electricity. There are too many disparate voices at the table to come up with a comprehensive policy that everybody can get behind. That's just the fact of the matter. You see it at the federal level. There is no comprehensive energy policy at the federal level. People say all of the above, but they never explain what that means, all right? So I think it is a fool's errand to try to come up with a comprehensive energy policy that everybody can get behind, because you're not going to get everybody to get behind it. You can try to make people a little bit less unhappy than they otherwise might be, but this is about making hard choices as far as what is the best way to ensure the lowest price for electricity in the state of Ohio. We don't want to be California. California's electricity prices are vastly higher than Ohio because they went all in on this renewable energy business. and now they've got rolling blackouts and raging forest fires because they neglected proper forest management in pursuit of their renewable energy mandates. We don't want to be California, okay? Neither do we necessarily want to be Kentucky, which is still overly reliant on coal. We need a mix. We have policies that promote a mix. I have a bill that would make it easier to finance energy efficiency through the Property Assessed Clean Energy Program. I've been working on that for a long time. We're getting ready to introduce that. That's a good measure. I've promoted solar myself. I have solar on my own roof, and it's been a pretty good deal because the federal government gave me a $5,000 tax credit on a $16,000 expense. We just have to do these things in a way that keeps the bottom line in mind. And the bottom line is, how do we get electricity produced at the lowest possible cost to the ratepayer? That's why House Bill 6 was a great bill. It cuts rates by $2.3 billion. That's not me saying that. That's the Legislative Service Commission, which is our independent, neutral arbiter of fiscal analysis of every piece of legislation. So I don't know why anybody would want to repeal a $2.3 billion rate cut. To me, I think it was the culmination of many, many years of policies that I personally have pursued long before Larry Householder came back to the House. So I think it's a good bill. We need to tighten the audit standards, maybe look at the decoupling provisions of the bill, which are very much in the weeds. Gene Krebs might understand it, and me and Joey, you might, but I'll be willing to take a look at that. But outright repeal would be about the dumbest thing we could do.
I will freely confess that I only understand a lot of energy policy in the morning after 4 cups of coffee. And since we're filming this after lunch, my brain's a little bit more foggy. I will, though, say it was one thing I do where Bill's coming from. I think one of the most important tools, though, to help with getting us to that stage, which we've been lacking at this point, is good data. And that applies to just about every segment you want to pick on here, whether that is what is the true profit losses of some of these companies, what is the real needs, some of the stuff that's going on here. And once again, I don't mean to sound like I'm going to spend this whole time beating up PUCO, but PUCO could be a lot better, I think, assistant to the General Assembly, to the administration, to the public by having a better data sources and better data streams.
Okay, thanks. Stephanie, I was curious, as the chamber with a broad, diverse membership, I'm just curious, with regard to the comprehensive type approach to potential replacement of House Bill 6, can you shed any light on that just from the business community?
Sure. As Joe said, we represent solar companies, we have wind companies, we have coal, we have the 2 nuclear plants in our membership, we have a huge presence of oil and gas in our membership. So for us, we come at it from the diverse, the all the above approach. I know that is hard to accomplish when everybody has their own interests, but I do believe having a free market approach to energy would also drive down the energy costs. And, we were interested parties during House Bill 6. And again, we are an interested party on these 3 repeal bills. However, we do believe if this House Bill 6 is repealed, we do have to replace, reform with some kind of comprehensive energy policy, whatever that may look like. But taking subsidies out of it completely might be the answer and might, bring down costs for everyone.
Well, Stephanie, how can a state legislature take away subsidies conferred by the federal government? So until we're able to get the federal government on the same no subsidy page as you would have us go in Ohio, that too is a fool's errand, because the federal subsidies are coming down on the renewable side. And as I pointed out a minute ago, wind is getting $21 per megawatt hour. That's fine for the Ohio Environmental Council. They don't have a problem with that. But oh my God, they got a big problem with $9 per megawatt hour for the nuclear power plants. So there's plenty of hypocrisy to go around. And a free market approach is something that you and I and Gene and probably Dan and everybody could get behind, but it is not achievable solely at the state level. There are federal policies, there's PJM policies that also enter into this equation that create multiple levels of unlevel playing field as between the different kinds of fuels with which we can make electricity.
No, I don't disagree with that, but I think here as a state legislature, we can do our best to not be in that game of picking winners and losers. The federal government's going to do what the federal government's going to do, but here at the state level, maybe we should take the lead on that.
Great. I'm going to follow up on something that came up there, and just about nuclear power in general. Is having a diverse resource mix? A lot of folks have said we want to all of the above. We'd like nuclear is an important part of our future, just like natural gas, renewables, et cetera. I guess should we be concerned that the specific assets, the nuclear generating units, about losing those, because it's as most studies will suggest, it's not likely that new nuclear units at the same size and scale will be available. So, Gene, do you have anything to add on that, or?
Yeah, you're raising a very good point. The analogy I've always used is that no farmer only plants one variety of corn. We generally plant 7 different varieties of corn. The problem is what this is running dead on into is I started wondering a little bit about this years ago, then hit upon an article in the Wall Street Journal probably back in 2010, 2011 that talked about many of the utilities tipping over into a death spiral. And it's not all utilities. It's some of them. It's those that are, in many cases, heavily invested in nukes. And it's a very thorny problem because once a utility gets tipped into that, and at the time, I remember I was talking to John Funk, then of the Plain Dealer, back in about 2011. I brought up this death spiral for him, and we were talking about, and I said, I frankly, looking at FE, they will probably try to spin off their losing subsidiaries and probably consider bankruptcy. Well, unfortunately, that's what we've been looking at here in Ohio. Look over to other states, some same stresses. I think the thing that we need to do is recognize that a lot of these utilities are indeed facing a death spiral. And the question is how do we avoid that, give them what I call the softest landing possible? We do not. If you talk to some bills earlier gone on, Representative Seitz, Representative Seitz brought up the environmentalists. I've had disquieting conversations with environmentalists over the years who want to see First Energy die and burst into flames. And I'm going, you don't want that because people need that electricity to function in everyday life. But we're going to need to figure something out. And this kind of goes back to my central theme here. We need better data. Okay, we need to understand which utilities are indeed going into a death spiral, which ones are not, and you can all just Google this. And we need to take a good, strong look at that. But we also then need to this is a much broader issue that this is kind of what goes back to what Dan's talking a lot about here. You need to look at regulatory capture, and you need to understand how that may also be impeding the ability of the state of Ohio, PUCO, the General Assembly, everybody involved to make some of the best decisions involved here.
Joe, I think the days of the big nuclear power plants being constructed are probably at a close. But I think what everybody is missing is the importance of these new, smaller, molten salt reactors, which are very efficient. And the problem that we have is a federal government problem, because the federal government is requiring these very small modular nuclear reactors to go through the same exhaustive licensing process as if they were building another 3 Mile Island or another Davis-Besse. We in the General Assembly have called upon the federal government to expedite the licensure process for small modular nuclear reactors. To my knowledge, they have not yet done so. I think there's a great future for nuclear of that type, and I think we need to get about pursuing it. But it's going to require cooperation with the federal government. And of course, we still have the lingering problem of where do we store the spent nuclear waste. But the good news is the small modular nuclear reactors produce but a fraction of the nuclear waste produced by the older reactors, such as the ones we have in Ohio. I was never a big fan of the argument that we should pass House Bill 6 in order to create or maintain jobs. We could create millions of jobs by requiring electricity to be made by rubbing two sticks together, but that would not be very efficient, okay? So the jobs argument, while it sells a lot of soap in Ottawa County and Lake County, that really never sold much soap with me. What did sell soap with me is the idea of prematurely retiring these plants before the end of their useful life. I mean, to me, that's the essence of conservatism. We don't buy a new car until the old car wears out. And if the nuclear power plants still have useful life left, they're producing carbon-free electricity, they're worth keeping around. I'm not suggesting we build new ones on that scale. I am suggesting there's a future for nuclear in the country's energy mix because it is very reliable. It runs at 90 to 95% capacity. Wind, in comparison, runs at about 25% of nameplate capacity. So it is very inefficient. We need to look at efficient ways of producing electricity.
And just to kind of piggyback off that, Ohio's nuclear plants also provide a large portion of the state's carbon-free energy, which lowers Ohio's overall emissions. So Ohio could potentially face some issues when it comes to complying with the EPA's air quality standards if there's not a mechanism to replace their capacity with some other carbon-free energy.
Great. I'll go back to you, Stephanie, so as you're just talking. Representative Stites just mentioned, the jobs at the nuclear plants. Those jobs are important, obviously, to the people that have them. But in a state with millions of people, and it's relatively small. But I'm just curious, what's the impact from the business community's perspective on jobs and industry if House Bill 6 is repealed, as a lot of folks are calling for?
Sure. I mean, obviously, any lost job is, not good for the state, for our overall economy. But as mentioned before, a straight repeal on House Bill 6 will reinstate costly energy efficiency mandates, which could be financially burdensome to some companies who are looking to, that are already navigating their way through this COVID pandemic and who are already having a hard time paying for their utility bills right now. However, if a repeal and a reform of the state's energy policy does take place, I think there's a potential for all interested parties to come to the table and have a free market approach that, might draw in some companies that we might not have been able to attract before. So I do think that there's that potential.
Well, Stephanie, I agree with you, but let's look to what other states have done. In other states, such as Illinois and New Jersey, that have extended nuclear subsidies, the price of that nuclear subsidy that was extended was a dramatic increase in their renewable portfolio mandates. So that, contrary to what Gene Krebs and I are advocating for in an ideal world, a subsidy-less future, the only way they've been able to come to terms in those very blue states on a nuclear subsidy is to hasten down the path detailed by AOC and others for greater subsidies, greater mandates on the renewable side. So to me, that's a cautionary tale. As we look for a comprehensive policy that everybody can agree on, we have to be careful that we don't end up with a comprehensive policy that simply multiplies the subsidy for everybody so that the ratepayers are in a lose-lose position down the line. And let's not forget this either. Here in southern Ohio, we don't have to worry about wind. We're not a very good wind resource area in this part of the state. But in northern Ohio, there's some wind resource, but they're finding that the folks up there, the folks in rural Ohio, do not want to be the garbage dump for urban millennials' wind dreams. They do not want 500 and 600 foot wind turbine towers in their backyards. They don't want them close by. They don't want them out in the middle of Lake Erie. They don't want them interfering with boating. They don't want them interfering with farming. They want strict standards for how far set back off the property lines these massive structures need to be. I guarantee you that if we tried to put a wind farm in Upper Arlington or Bexley or any of these little Tony neighborhoods in and around Columbus, the people would go absolutely berserk. And why do I say that? Because like Gene Krebs, I'm old enough to remember when they started building cell phone towers, and I remember how the residential people didn't like them. And we're only talking about 100-foot tall towers there that didn't have moving parts. These wind turbines have moving parts that break, that fall off, okay, that catch fire. And so when we talk about greater reliance on renewables, it really is an assault on rural Ohio as we talk specifically about wind.
You know, Joe, I would, I guess, like to point out that I understand, and I've been to the Finance Committee hearings during the budget and during other types of legislation moving through various committees, and I understand how folks in Northwest Ohio, many of them don't like the windmills. And I think I wish that their concern for their fellow man extended to the agricultural runoff that is now causing algae blooms in Lake Erie, and that their concern for the folks of the city of Toledo and surrounding areas were reciprocated. Because I know we pay a lot of attention to the concerns about the folks in Northwest Ohio and the windmill, but that concern doesn't really seem to extend to what's going on in Lake Erie. Now, one of the things I would point out with regard to subsidies, whether you're talking about renewable or something else, is that when you subsidize renewable energy like wind and solar, they are emerging industries which we can expect to improve in terms of efficiency and cost effectiveness. When you look at something like nuclear, it's already been said that the nuclear plants are going to soon be obsolete. Same thing goes with coal. I don't really see much of an argument that coal is going to at some point reemerge as a viable, whether it's economic or environmentally friendly source of energy. And so when we're talking about things that we should be subsidizing, I think typically the state of Ohio would want to invest in things that are emerging and not receding. And that's what I see with nuclear. That's what a lot of people see with nuclear. Now, Representative Seitz said that there's new kinds of plants that are much smaller and their footprint is much smaller. If we want to invest in those, that's a different argument than investing in two giant nuclear plants that have a limited lifespan, who earned that subsidy politically through a lot of shady dealings. And so that's where I think that when we talk about, an all of the above energy policy, I do agree that it's a pie in the sky type of thing, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. 100 years ago, an all of the above transportation policy might have included the horse and buggy. That doesn't mean that it would have been a viable or smart strategy to pursue 100 years ago or 120 years ago. But I do think that the state, if we're going to invest in things through subsidies, we ought to be doing it in sectors that have the chance to improve and not simply be ones that we're extending the inevitable death of.
I don't really disagree with what Dan said, but I would make 2 points. First, the House Bill 6 subsidy for the nuclear power plants is a 7-year deal. It ends in 7 years, and the plants both have more than 7 years left on their useful life. So we're not talking about subsidizing something beyond its useful life. That's number one. Number two, I offered And one of the versions of House Bill 6 before final passage included a provision granting $25 million for battery storage research. Because if we're ever going to make wind and solar truly viable and reliable, they're going to need to solve the storage problem of storing the electricity that is produced when the wind blows and the sun shines, so that it can be distributed when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. $25 million, and it was in the bill. And we offered that to the Democrats, hoping that they would come on board with the bill. And their response was, no, we don't care about that. We just want the renewable portfolio standard to be 50% renewables by the year 2050. And once the Democrats made that clear, that that was their price of acceptance for most of them, it became very easy to sell to my Republican colleagues, well, we better go with what we got in House Bill 6, because the alternative that they're proposing, I called it Plan AOC. It wasn't Plan A or B or C. It was Plan AOC. And that made it easy for us to get the vote.
But I think in a situation like that, the 25 million still would have made a lot of sense. So I can't speak to the strategic deliberations of the House Democratic Caucus or the Senate Democratic Caucus, for that matter. But I think it still would have been worth pursuing. And I understand how negotiations go, obviously.
I agree with you, Dan. I agree with you. But you know how it is. You serve in the legislature. Well, I'll give you the amendment. Are you going to vote for the bill? No, I'm not going to vote for the bill. Well, then I'm not going to give you the amendment. That's nothing new. That goes back. I'm sure that goes back before Gene Krebs's time, right, Gene?
Let's see. I'm trying to think if dinosaurs could. I think the dinosaurs were still alive. They hadn't yet turned into oil at that point. But I do want to. You're touched upon an important issue here, which is, storage and all that. So there's a thing called Moore's Law, developed by Henry Moore, one of the founders of Intel. And what he said was that every 2 years, your capacity of your chips, your transistors in whatever your computer, your iPhone, whatever, doubles. And there's a variation of that we're seeing also going on in renewable energy efficiency, that every year they become 10% more efficient, lower cost per kilowatt. What that means at a practical level is about every 4 years with compounding, their prices drop by almost half. This is the thing I've asked people to think about. What do you do with renewable energy by about the year 2030, 2032 is being on the over a penny a kilowatt hour? And everybody just gives me that blank look and then asks me, how do I like that wheat beer? Because nobody wants to talk about that. Because that, as this is becoming, once again, what I think what the General Assembly is trying to deal with, what PUCO, what the IOUs are all trying to deal with, we are in an incredibly disruptive time. And the question is, what path will we choose to deal with that? That's the question we need to be asking.
Good exchange. I'll tell you, if power's 1 cent, 1 cent per kilowatt hour in 2030, I'll be dancing in the streets personally. So
on renewables,
that would be great, great news. Right. And I guess we have one last question. We're coming up on it. This is kind of a broader question, and it's really, we don't really know what's going to happen right now on House Bill 6, whether they do nothing, whether they repeal it in its entirety, whether they repeal part of it, whether they replace it or reform it or otherwise. But I guess, what are the policy considerations, or what should be the driving motivations for Ohio's energy policy going forward? And let's start with Gene.
Well, once again, I'll go back to saying that we need a comprehensive strategy. I like what Bill said earlier about the difficulty of just getting where you got to on your point in time. I think good data would get you to 85%. My goal has always been never to get to 100% on any good piece of legislation. If you get to 85%, of the General Assembly voting for it. You've got a good piece of legislation. There's always going to be some outliers. And I think the thing that we have to acknowledge, and I think we also need a more, shall we say, I don't want to say aggressive, I want to say a more involved, less hands-off PUCO on how they deal and how they weigh in on these issues, because we need people there who live and breathe these utility issues every day, who are intimately familiar with the nuances of this, who can help guide the state on data and the accumulation of that. But I think we also have to recognize that this death spiral, and you can Google this. This is not a wild, thing coming out of, QAnon or anything. Death spiral for utilities is a real concern. And what we're seeing here is FE, knowing it's into a death spiral, I believe tried to go ahead and get itself out through getting government assistance. That's not a long-term game that we should be allowing them to play. And we need to come up with some better ways to handle this so that they do not land hard, break, and shatter.
Long policy considerations for Ohio's future energy policy, Representative Stites?
Well, I certainly am always interested in better data. And I think the world of the current chairman of the PUCO, Sam Randazzo, who in his prior life I found to be one of the most authoritative, if not the most authoritative expert on energy policy in the state of Ohio. His recent testimony to the House Select Committee is worth reading by everyone in this dispute, in this debate, because it is excellent, excellent testimony. And the good news is the PUCO has been much more forthright under Chairman Randazzo than under previous chairman, because the previous governor muzzled the PUCO and would not let the PUCO provide the kind of input that we used to get way back in the days when I first started in the General Assembly. And Kasich treated it as another state agency to be held at arm's distance from the legislature. I thought that was a terrible mistake. So we need to have more interaction with the PUCO, with the Ohio Consumers Council. They make some good points. That would be a subject for another seminar. And I think Mr. Krebs and I would find ourselves in somewhat of agreement on some reforms that they've been advocating for a long time, such as the utilities getting to hold on to their ill-gotten rate gains when the Supreme Court rules against them. I mean, we got to find a way out of that conundrum too.
It's called legislation, Bill. Legislation.
The utilities, if not in a death spiral, they're finding it very difficult to compete in a world in which some of their competitors are getting heavy subsidies from the federal government, and others of their competitors are still operating in regulated states where they get full cost plus rate of return. We made the decision to deregulate generation 20 years ago or more, and some would argue it really hasn't worked because our competitors in Kentucky and Indiana that are still operating in regulated environments are giving the utilities cost plus rate of return, which prevents them from being in a death spiral. So it's too late to re-regulate. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. There are too many viable competitive retail electric suppliers to do that. But that is a real challenge, Gene, and I don't know what the answer is. But frankly, I don't want to see them in a death spiral either. And I think to some extent, that is why we protected OVEC in this bill. That is why we helped the 2 nuclear power plants in this bill to prevent a death spiral.
And I want to say, Bill makes a very point there about you got to be careful about how people, there's been some solar facilities put up in southern Ohio based on House Bill 6. So that's going to be a difficult level to untangle. But Bill, I would just simply say you could go ahead and pass legislation tomorrow saying that, the ability of PUCO to claw back that stuff could happen fairly quickly and fairly easily. Getting that through, good luck. I will actually leave the farm and travel 111 miles. I'll hitch up the horse and I'll come.
Well, Gene, I've advocated a compromise that would decree that a certain percentage of every PUCO rate decision would be deemed subject to refund. So that if the complainants go up to the Supreme Court and win, that identified statutory percentage, be it 10%, 20%, 30%, would be subject to refund if the Supreme Court ultimately ruled in favor of the complainants and against the utility. That's my compromise on that issue.
Bill, I go with 99.78%.
Great. Okay. Well, I mean, we have one. It looks like we got a question from the audience. I guess I'm not sure if anybody wants to. Whoever wants to tackle this, we'll just read it verbatim. Kramer mentioned we would be in violation of the federal requirements if nukes go down. What does that mean to Ohio in terms of actual energy costs or impact on business? I'm not sure if anyone wants to address that. I'm not sure what violation of what federal requirement.
Well, Stephanie, you can take that, but I'm pretty sure what she meant to say was that if you take the nuclears offline, and they're producing 90% of Ohio's carbon-free electricity and 15% of Ohio's total electricity load, there is a risk that parts of Ohio that are now in compliance with U.S. EPA air quality standards might fall out of compliance. Isn't that what you were saying, Stephanie?
Right. And then we know that certain Northeast Ohio already has an issue with staying in attainment with air quality standards. So yes, getting rid of the nuclear plants would only make this a lot more difficult and maybe impossible if there are no carbon-free energy alternatives to replace that big capacity load that the nuclear plants provide.
Great. I think we're right up on the hour. Got a lot of good discussion, I think. So with that, I guess we'll turn it back to Rich. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Hey, that was a great discussion. Really appreciate that. I'll just go ahead and wrap it up. But again, I just want to thank all of our panelists, and I also want to thank our viewers. I think we had a great dialogue here today, and I think everybody would agree with that. And I know I learned a lot. I'm sure you did too. And to our viewers, please let us know if you have any questions or concerns, or if we could be of any assistance on this issue or any for that matter. We're here to help any way we can. Please see our website for more details about us. And also, we're going to try to do these panels more often as well. And if you have any ideas for any future panel topics, please let us know. We'd like to find some good discussions that people are interested in. So just let us know. Don't feel free to, or feel free to reach out. Other than that, just want to thank you guys again and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very enjoyable.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.